being here and for joining today's session. Um, my name is Genesis Lozano. I'm a career counselor here at the Career Center, and I specifically work on-campus student employment programming. And I also want to take a moment to introduce my team as well, since y'all are here. They're the folks that have this beautiful background like mine. So I'll pass it over to just the first person I'm seeing on my screen, Shannon, and then pass it on over to whoever you want to after Shannon.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Shannon. I'm a grad assistant here at the Career Center. Very happy to be here and take part in this project. So I hope you all enjoy. All right, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Isabel.
Hi everyone, happy Monday and first day of on-campus Student Employment Week. My name is Isabel Casas and I'm a career advisor out of the Career Center. Welcome. I will popcorn it over to Sarah.
Thank you, Isabel. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our first event for On-Campus Student Employment Week. I'm glad you can make it. I'm Sarah, and I'm one of the peer educators here at the Career Center. I'll popcorn to Nyla.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself, Nyla.
Yes, I'm here. Hello and happy Monday, everyone, in April. My name is Dr. Nyla Jolly Delfres. I'm the director of the Career Center, and our Career Center is run by student employees. We couldn't do it without them. So thank you all for being here, and I hope you enjoy this session. I think that's it for our team. All
Yep.
right.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. We're going to jump into kind of the first activity I have for y'all, which is a poll. I want to see kind of what you all know already, what you would want to learn today. This always helps us kind of as we move forward with different events that we host, learn what you all want to see out of us, but also get a baseline of where you're at and what can we think about in the future in terms of creating workshops for. So Isabel just launched the poll. So if you can go ahead and take like couple minutes. It's a pretty quick, pretty brief poll to answer some of the questions to help us as we move forward with programming. So we're gonna hang tight here and wait for some kind of answers to trickle in. Um, yeah, it helps us tremendously collecting kind of this info to help us as we move forward with kind of planning and moving forward with any type of programming we do. So please let me know. Look, okay, awesome. I see responses coming in. Yay. Thank you, thank you. It looks like we have a lot of health and human development majors. Yay. Got some Curb College of Arts and Media and Communication. Got some College of Business students here, Social and Behavioral Sciences. Yay, a lot of seniors. Yay, I'm glad to see seniors, juniors in today's session. Excited for us to move forward. I'm going to leave it open for like 30 more seconds just to get the last kind of two responses for today. Wrap up your thoughts. All right. Yay. One last response. I'm going to leave it open for a little bit while I go into the next slide, and then you can close in a little bit, Isabel. Um, As you all are kind of the last person's wrapping up their thoughts, I want to remind you all that there's a Q&A function, so throw any questions that you might have in the Q&A function. It'll help us as we're navigating questions. So you should see it at on the bottom of your Zoom. You might have to like add more tools or hit the more button. Sometimes if it doesn't show up for you, to add it to the bottom of your toolbar. All right. We'll go ahead and jump in. And you can close the poll for now, Isabel. I think that'll be good. And we're going to jump into a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. So if you're like, what did I sign up for? What's this workshop focused on? These are learning outcomes from today. We're going to talk about what makes a strong resume. We're going to talk about transferable skills and how to identify them in an on-campus job and use them when you start thinking about, your overall career goals. We're going to understand how to develop impactful experience statements using action verbs. So really kind of the bread and butter of your resume is learning how to describe what did you do in different roles. And then we're going to leverage LinkedIn and opportunities to support your career goals. But before we jump into content, I really want to reiterate kind of like what a lot of my colleagues have said already is thank you, right? If you work on campus, you are the heartbeat of our campus. You make our community better, and you do a lot of unseen work that helps keep the campus running. So I just want to take a moment to really say thank you and, happy on-campus Student Employment Week. We're excited at the Career Center to, pilot programming that supports student employees, and we really just want to say thank you. Um, and today's event really couldn't be possible without my team. So From Here to Career is a team that I work on, and all the folks that introduced themselves today are part of the From Here to Career team. So we want to just say like, hey, we're here to support you. And what From Here to Career is, it's an opportunity to take advantage of a career readiness program designed specifically for student employees. And we want to say, hey, sign up. There's cohorts in the fall and the spring semester. It's a great opportunity to take advantage of if you're a student employee on campus, or if you become one, if you're not quite there yet and you're just interested in finding an on-campus job, it's a great opportunity to take advantage of as you're thinking about um, potentially taking on an on-campus job. But we recruit twice a year, once in the fall, once in the spring, and it's a great opportunity just to start thinking about, again, like have a bigger conversation and a cohorted experience where you earn a certificate at the end of it and get support from your dedicated advisor, which is Isabel, and peer educators like Sarah, who help you through your experience of being a student employee. So if you're interested, there's a QR code. Feel free to scan it and get for more information about From Here to Career and to join fun events like this that we host for on-campus student employees and of course all students. All right, so kind of the first I decided when I put together this presentation, I was like, how should I kind of like bubble this down to make it a little bit easier to kind of take away things from it. So I decided that, I do takeaways. So kind of one of the first takeaways we're going to go into right now is resume format, content, and structure matter, right? My goal is for you to understand how to craft your resume, including your current on-campus job experience. So if you're currently an on-campus student employee, I want to make sure that you understand that you already have the most up-to-date resume that includes your current experience. So let's look at some of the basics of resume formatting. All right, so let's start at the beginning. What is a resume? So it's really just a written summary of your education, experience, relevant skills, with a focus of, finding a job, finding an internship, some sort of opportunity. You'll also maybe use resumes for scholarships and other kind of things. So that's really just kind of a summary of who you are as a professional, if you will. What's the purpose? It's really to serve as an introduction to potential employers, and for you to also help make meaning of your experiences either inside or outside of the classroom, right? It's at the end of the day, it's a marketing tool, right? Or a networking tool that goes at career fairs or events that you attend. But it's just the next step to get us an interview, right? It's not the end all be all. It's not going to guarantee you get a job, but it's going to open doors to the next step of the job search process, which is an interview. Right? It's just that first step in the application process. So what makes a strong resume, right? Let's take a look at these kind of two sample resumes that I put here. I know it might be a little hard to see, but one, what's going to make it strong is that it's well organized, right? Employers, recruiters, anyone who's looking at your resume often is looking at a lot of other resumes alongside yours. So you want to make sure it's well organized so that they're not having to find the information, right? You wanted to make it as easy as possible. You want to also make sure that it's tailored to the job position or opportunity. So like you said, we might be creating a resume for a variety of reasons. This could be to apply to a scholarship, right? So maybe your scholarship resume looks different than the resume you use to apply to an internship or towards a full-time job after graduation. So really make sure you look at what you're including on your resume and if it's tailored to the role that you're applying to. And we're going to look at that a little bit closer in a moment. Make sure it's easy to read. If I'm distracted by certain things going on in your resume, or you have really small font, not very accessible to someone who's trying to read millions of resumes. So really think about the aesthetic of your resume. Is it well organized? Is it put together? Is it easy to read? Because really recruiters, employers, on average, recruiters spend an average of 15 seconds reviewing your resume, right? So this is not to scare you, but it's also for you to understand that employers have limited time, right, when they're going through applications, or folks who are reviewing applications like recruiters or human resource, roles, they have limited time. So you really want to make sure you're putting your best foot forward and being as concise as possible for someone reading your resume. So where do you begin if you're thinking about like, okay, how do I begin kind of writing my resume? Where to begin in terms of updating my resume, right? So maybe you're brainstorming all experiences, paid, unpaid. This is the point where you check in with yourself, and as a student employee, you're saying, have I included my current role on my resume, right? Most often times when I check in with student employees, I'm like, is your current role on your resume? And they're like, no. And I'm like, you should always have an updated resume, right? So this is a good time to check in of like, okay, is my resume updated, and how am I going to include my current role into my resume? Review job description. So think about right now, if you're in a current on-campus job, see if you can find your job description. Reflect on what you do. What are some projects or accomplishments that you want to showcase on your resume that are maybe more relevant to your career goals? And if you're like struggling to find that, then this is time to have those conversations with your supervisor of like, hey, I'm interested in taking on initiative or taking on a certain project. Where can we begin? Right? Start beginning thinking about reverse chronological order. That's probably the most easiest way to start reflecting. What's your most current position, all the way to kind of working backwards from there. So it helps you kind of remember and kind of jog your memory. Google is my best friend. So if you're like, what type of skills should I list on my resume? What does that look like, right? Starting off with Google, of thinking about like, okay, Googling soft skills versus hard skills, and then seeing the different listed skills put out for you. You can start picking skills that are relevant maybe to the industry that you are pursuing, but that overlap with your experiences. So as always, like being honest on your resume is going to get you a lot further, because you have to back that up in an interview, right? Don't list things on your resume that you are not comfortable talking about in your interview, because you want to make sure you're building that trust with employers. All right, so what is included in the resume? Let's look at some of the categories. For sure, everyone in terms of essential categories has to have your contact information. Fun fact, I did this once where I submitted resumes and I forgot, like, because I put it in the header, which is the one you have to like open manually, I forgot to put in my contact information. And I was like, why am I not getting interviews? And it was because of that. So always make sure your contact information is there. Your education is showcased, experience, relevant skills. These are for sure the categories that I would recommend every resume has, to make sure you're putting your best foot forward. And then there's optional categories. There's not one resume that fits everything. I wish I could say there's like this one template that you can use for everything. It really depends on the industry you're pursuing, what type of roles you're looking for in terms of what your resume is going to look like. So some optional categories could be awards, it could be training you've completed, either certifications, extracurriculars, if you're part of clubs, or leadership kind of activities, you want to include that. If you've attended conferences or if you've done presentations, these are things you can definitely include in your resume as well. So let's break down the essential categories a little bit closer. All right, so contact information is one of those essential categories. What you will have to have, right, is your name. It should be the biggest font on the page. It should be easy to stand out. I should see at least your phone number and your email. Students, very common nowadays to have your LinkedIn link. You want to build that trust and credibility with employers, so make sure you have that in your contact info. Again, other examples, they might look a little bit different depending on where you're at. Common trend now also is generally students won't put, like, used to be like put your full address. Don't put your full address. You can generally put an area that you're in. If you're applying to jobs in Los Angeles, go ahead, just generally put Los Angeles. Like if that's where you kind of want to end up, you can. Even nowadays, students are not even listing like city, state. That's also okay. If you just wanted to put, your contact info, that's also okay as well. And as you're thinking about where you're applying to, if you're applying to an on-campus job, put your CSUN email. I want to know you're a student. If you're applying to full-time jobs, internships off campus, for post-graduation, you do lose access to your CSUN email about 6 months after graduation. I would recommend a personal, professional email that you can use to build contacts, right? Because eventually you might lose access to your CSUN email, and I want you to keep kind of any emails that you've submitted to apply to certain roles. So keep that in mind. All right, let's zoom into your education. So these are some good examples of like what your education section should look like. Under your education section, you should have your degrees. You will not be listing high school anymore, so it's just degrees. You're here at CSUN pursuing some sort of bachelor degree. So this is a good example. You'd like list out bachelors of arts, whatever your major is in information science and e-society. In this case is the students, which we do not have here at CSUN, FYI, if you're wondering. But they also have a minor, so they listed their minor and they just listed their expected graduation date. So if you were a transfer student, which I hope I have a handful of transfer students here. List also your associate's degree or your associate's to transfer if you have that. Go ahead and put that under education as well. Avoid using acronyms. I know it's one of our favorite things to do. Of course, with the state, you can use the acronym, but actually write out CSUN. So write out California State University Northridge, because depending on where you're applying to, they might not know what that acronym means. So please write it out. Some additional things that you can add to your education could be like relevant coursework if you wanted to. This is a good example right here. They added the relevant coursework, but notice it's not just the acronym of the class. They're not putting SOC, SOC 100, right? They're putting the title of the class and they're writing it out. Because I, as an employer, I might not know what SOC means and I'm going to be confused, and it's not going to add anything to your resume. Again, make it easy to read. You can add your GPA. That's definitely something you can do. It kind of varies. Some employers will ask for it depending on the internship program or the role that you might be applying to. I don't see it as often where employers might be asking for it. It just depends on the industry. And of course, if you're comfortable with it, typically I'd advise like 3.0 and above, go ahead and list it, but it's definitely not a requirement that you have to list on your resume. All right, so let's break down experience. This is like the most important part probably of your resume. It's like the bread and butter. So let's talk about how to properly showcase your experience. So this is where we're going to talk about these kind of action verbs. So first off, I can clearly see the job title, right? This person is a peer leader. They have it bolded. That identifies it. I can see who they worked for, the organization, the company, right? I can see it was for a high school. I can see that was in Temecula, California, right? These small details build trust as someone's looking at your resume. I can see the dates. In this case, right, if you think back to your education, we did not list when we started school, but we listed when we ended, so I can clearly see the dates. And then, of course, I can see the clear action statements with quantified tasks. So let's take a closer look at what that means, right? It starts off with an action verb, like support, right? Typically with action statements, we're not looking for full sentences, right? We are looking for clear and concise action statements that usually start off with an active verb. So support is a good example of that, right? This other one says like create, lead, like you're starting off with verbs that insinuates that you're leading a task. We also say when we're thinking about creating these descriptions, quantify, which just means add numbers, right? So don't just say like, led a group of parents at summer orientation, right? It adds more depth if you say led a group of 10 plus parents at summer orientation, giving me, someone reading your resume, a little bit more context. And again, that trust of seeing how large that task that you took on was. So when you can, please do try to quantify. And when we're thinking about what to list in our experience section, showcase your experiences or your accomplishments. What are some projects that you completed? What are some things that you accomplished? Yes, we can list, your regular duties as associated within like one bullet point, but you also want to take this time to think about what are the skills that I'm showcasing through this experience that I take on, and how am I going to tailor it to the role that I'm applying to? So let's look at a little bit closer. Right, so if we're going to break down an action statement, we take that simple statement, right, like answering a phone. Okay, but what did you do? You answered about 50 to 60 phone calls in a day. How did you do it, right? You were maybe in a fast-paced office. There was a multi-line phone system, and you had to communicate effectively to anyone who you were speaking to on the other side of the phone. What were the results, right? So instead of just focusing on tasks, you want to be result oriented. What came out of you finishing a project? What came out of you answering phones within a day? What were the results? Customers' needs were met. Customers were satisfied with your service, right? So if we took that simple statement, right, and we reflected and kind of broke it down, we can make a much more stronger action statement. So answered 50 to 60 phone calls per day in a fast-paced office using effective communication through a multi-line phone system, resulting in increased positive customer satisfaction, right? This process of just taking that simple statement, breaking it down, allowed us to think of a more stronger action statement to put in your resume. And this is the piece that employers are looking at and aligning, right, in terms of what skills you're bringing to this new role that you're applying to. So it really is one of the most important aspects of your resume. And if you're like, what, okay, how, as I am, when I'm constantly thinking about writing, I'm like, okay, I feel like I've been using the same word for the past 3 bullet points. What I really like is in our resume guide, which you'll get a copy of in a moment. Think of verbs from different areas or categories by skill sets. So really, right, when you're thinking about writing these bullet points for your experiences, think about what skills are necessary for the job that you're applying to. So if you're currently maybe a student assistant working at a front desk area right now for any department, think about what skills you're gaining in your role that are going to be important for the job that you'd want to have after you leave CSUN. So maybe you want to go into marketing, right? Within marketing, maybe there's a lot of persuasion and convincing people or communicating, right? So you're like, okay, I want to think about what communication skills I'm addressing in this role. So go down to the communication column, go ahead and look for an active verb to start off your sentence with, right? So it allows you to be specific and express certain skills within your resume, a cover letter, or even an interview, right? So it's a helpful list that you all will have access to. All right, so I want to go over briefly the optional sections that I mentioned. So again, not everyone might have these sections, but you might, as a student, want to showcase some of your certifications or awards. If you even work off campus, or if you've ever worked food before, you might even have like a food handler certification. That's something you can put on here. If you're a lifeguard out of the USU or working out of the Student Recreation Center, you might have even the CPR certification. That's something you can add on. Just make sure you like add expiration dates if applicable, and where you earn this this kind of certification, right? So this is a good example of someone listed their certifications. What if you have volunteer extracurriculars? It's very similar to work experience. I might even argue you can put it under general experience. Again, it's a lot about preference and what works for you. It can be used as a great starting point for paid experience. So if I have students in here that are like, I'm looking for an on-campus job right now, but I feel like I have limited experience, volunteerism, extracurriculars, joining leadership on campus through like associated students or clubs is a great place to begin building those skills. And it's how a lot of students actually kind of begin their career on campus to allow them to get paid work. So this is a good example. I know I have a lot of students within health and human development. You're required for a lot of the majors to get volunteer hours at a local hospital. So this is a good example of how you might showcase that volunteer experience. Another good example of someone who's just a part of different organizations on campus. The student's a part of the Black Student Union on the campus, which is a great opportunity to get leadership skills. And they're part of another club that they're the president of. So this is a great way to kind of also showcase your extracurriculars. Let's say you went to a conference, you got, through your department, you're able to go to a conference. This is kind of how you would showcase that. Very simple, right? Typically, I recommend students only to include it if you feel like you had an active role within those spaces. You can definitely still list like clubs as like a member, but be proactive in terms of trying to think about how can I get involved more and how can I gain leadership? Because that's what employers look for, is like what is the leadership or the role that this person took on within the organization. And then skills. So this is actually one of the recommended essential sections that I kind of want to go over with you all. I talked about it a little bit in terms of soft skills versus hard skills at the beginning, but you really want to list skills that are relevant to the job description, right? So think about, again, when you're, the biggest piece of advice that I want you all to take away is read the job description, right? What are you applying to? Look at the job duties. What are some of the tasks that you'd be taking on? So list skills that are relevant to the job description. Manage the length just like any other section. I don't want to see like over 50 skills under the skills section. I really want you to think critically, right? And think about what skills you're listing that are going to help you with the role. Avoid subjective skills such as like hardworking, team player, passionate. I love it. I love I love seeing that, and I know those are some character traits that you might have, but those are things that maybe you can speak about in your cover letter, right? Or you can get across in the interview. Your resume is supposed to be listing, it's supposed to be more concise of you, so really think about what skills you're listing. Again, focus on showcasing transferable skills, because they're skills that can be applied in many different jobs or situations. And I know I've mentioned transferable skills a little bit. We're going to dive deep into what those are and kind of the next takeaway, okay? So here are some good examples of some skill section, right? Focusing on kind of skills that you know you can talk about in an interview. So that's what I often tell students too. If it's on your resume, it's fair game for me as an employer to ask you, hey, tell me more about your project management skills, or tell me about a time that you've used collaboration to help accomplish a project, right? So really be intentional about the skills that you're showcasing. So this is another good example. The one up here they just listed. The one down here, they decided to like categorize it within specific areas. So really a good kind of way to think about how to list your skills. All right, so I kind of breezed through resumes, but here's the QR code to download our resume and cover letter guide. So a lot of what I took and I put into our slides today is in our guide. So it goes, there's the action verbs list, there is the breakdown of how to take a simple statement to an action statement. So I encourage you all to scan the QR code, and I also have one member of my team throw the link to this in the chat as well for you all to access. All right, so resumes, we checked that off. Let's go into takeaway 2. Let's dive into identifying transferable skills from your on-campus job to tailor your resume. So let's look at what even transferable skills are. All right, so let's understand transferable skills. They're core abilities that apply across roles and industries. So they can be skills that you got from school and your academics and your classes, maybe from an internship, or in your case, an on-campus job, right? You have an on-campus job. You are getting such valuable transferable skills in your role now, working on campus, that you can apply to your overall career goal. So we're really zooming out big picture, right? We, as a career center, know that as a student employee on campus, you're getting great experience. But we want to do, and what my team wants to make sure is that you're taking advantage of this opportunity as a student employee and leveraging it to help you in your overall career goals, right? So they're skills that open doors no matter where you are. So this could be communication skills, this could be problem solving, critical thinking, customer service skills are huge, and you're going to use them in many capacities. So really, this is so many different skills that can transfer over into different spaces. All right, and why are they important? Why are we having this conversation about transferable skills? It's something that employers value and they look for, right? It shows your career readiness and potential. It allows you to demonstrate adaptability and learning mindset. Well, although maybe your current on-campus role might not directly apply to what you want to do overall after graduation or in your career, it shows that you have been able to critically think and think about what are the tasks I'm taking on that I can apply into other roles, right? So it really helps you succeed in new environments. So I want to show you all to kind of highlight them, how to highlight them in today's session. So let's jump in. So what transferable skills do you think you gain from your on-campus job? Feel free to throw some answers in the chat to kind of share out. I'll take a moment to look at the chat, take a pause here. All right. Go ahead and reflect for the student employees I do have in the chat. What are some transferable skills that you think you gain from your on-campus job? Think about the tasks that you complete now. Throw in some skills in the chat. It could be problem solving, it could be working with others, it could be some simple things like customer service, answering emails. That I promise you will do in pretty much every role you might take on if you're working in the outdoor settings. So while you all are thinking about that, just because of time, I'm going to jump to how to recognize some of your skills. So as we start reflecting and thinking about, okay, what skills do I bring? What skills am I thinking about from my role currently? So ask yourself, what projects maybe I've led? What projects have I assisted with, right? Did you improve a process or task in your role, right? And if you're like, well, I haven't necessarily done that yet, maybe you're newer to your position, you're getting acclimated, think about what initiatives can you lead as you move forward in your role, right? As a supervisor, I love it when my students, I encourage all and every idea. So reflect in your role and think about what is something that I do that I can make more efficient, that I could help my team, that I can improve. Because oftentimes students are the one, when you're doing the role, you can think about, well, there's a probably better way to do this. Like, let's try this instead. Be proactive, take initiative, and, bring that up to your supervisor. That skill in itself, understanding how to be proactive and take initiative, is something that employers look for, and they often want to see examples of as you move forward into your career. So when we begin now thinking about reflecting our experience, this is a good time in the year, if you're an on-campus student employee, to start reflecting on what skills am I building and how do they align to what I want to do overall. All right, so let's practice, right? Because what we want to do is be able to identify skills when we're reading a job description. And if you're like, okay, I'm thinking about, wanting to get an on-campus job, or I'm thinking about applying to internships off campus, because that's where I'm at right now. I've been working on campus for a full year, I'm a junior, or I'm thinking about getting on an internship. Let's think about how to read a job description to understand how to identify skills, right? So this is an actual job description that I pulled from online. And the position itself was a college advisor position. So these are the exact bullet points that I pulled from online. And again, I really want to stress it's important for you to read the entire job description, but most importantly, really look at the position duties to help you tailor your resume. If you know down the road, you're like, I do want to go into college advising, I do want to go into this role, look at roles that you aspire to be in and look at the job duties. What are the skills that they're asking for? What type of tasks will you complete? It helps you start to think about like, okay, well, I need to gain skills in maybe project management or graphic design. It helps us kind of zoom in a little bit closer to what skills maybe you want to focus on. So let's look at this again, but now let's identify the skills in the job description. All right, so again, this one, in terms of the job description, it's like one-on-one advising with students, right? So it's that one-on-one, maybe individual advising with students. That is that skill that we're picking up on. It's visiting classrooms, assemblies, and student organizations. So to educate and promote, right? Those are kind of those skills that this bullet point is focusing on, is the aspect of educating, presenting, promoting, and doing outreach, right? Next up is like organizing events and activities. So it's organization, right? Getting involved, thinking about ways to organize events, do programming, right? So these are all clues to us of thinking of like, what skills do I want to focus on as I move forward? Establishing productive working relationships. So again, like working on a team, right? Really understanding how to work with others in a workspace is super important. That's going to be used in every workspace I can imagine, right? So those transferable skills that we're identifying here. And this is just from you and I reading a job description, right? So again, I want to stress, even if you're like thinking about, okay, what are my career goals? What are roles that I want to look for after graduation? Let's say you're currently a student employee and you're like, okay, my plan was to get an on-campus job. I got one, but how do I continue working on my career development? Spend some time looking at job descriptions related to maybe your major just for now and see if there's any roles that you aspire to that you would want to, that piques your interest just as you're looking at the job title. And then you can kind of weed out some of those skills that you're like, okay, these are some skills that this job needs. This is what I can try to focus on in terms of getting stronger within my on-campus job. All right, so now that we read the job description, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take some time building our resume based off of those kind of transferable skills we identified. So let's say we're currently a peer educator on campus. I know there's a lot of different places on campus that have peer educators or peer mentors or peer advisors, depending on whatever department you might be in. In this case, this happens to be someone who works at the Career Center. And let's say they were applying to that college advisor position, right? What they did was they took that exact language, right, from the job description, because that is something that they did in their role, right, and they put it into their description. So they put in provided personalized career advice and support to students, right? Notice how we're highlighting that transferable skill we got from the job description, knowing that you have it from your on-campus job and you're incorporating it into your experience description, right? They went in further and they gave me like the time range, right? Okay, 10 to 15-minute one-on-one virtual and in-person drop-in sessions, right? So I took again that same language, that one-on-one, and incorporated it into the experience description. Let's look at the next one, right? Organize workshops and career readiness events that are educated and promoted Career Center resources. So again, I looked at the job description, I identified which skills overlapped with mine, and I incorporated it into the job description. This is really the key part of transferable skills. It's really, like Isabel said in the chat, mirroring the language, right, from the position description into your resume. Next one, it was develop and facilitate presentations, right? So something that they focused on in that last job description that we kind of read in between the lines was understanding how to facilitate presentations or educate, right? They said educate and promote. That probably means doing workshops for students or working on presentations for students or organizations. You want to make sure you highlight that because that's a skill that you have. And then next one, I think is the last one, is conducted on-campus outreach initiatives to engage with students. They talked about promotion, right, which could mean outreach and connecting with others. So you want to, if this is something you've done before, one of the accomplishments that I have, or through being a peer educator, I know that they take on is outreach initiatives, right? So it's a project or an initiative that they lead. So that's also something you can showcase as you're writing these descriptions. And actually the last one was one of those last bullet points that we saw with the job description was they talked about having productive working relationships, right? That means working with others. That could mean other student staff. That could mean full-time staff. they want to know that you can work in a team, right? There are certain skills when I think about skills that students bring with them that I can't necessarily train you on. I can train you how to, give a presentation. I can train to teach you how to work with students. I can't necessarily, might be a little bit harder to do it for teamwork, right? Or for effective communication skills, which I could train on, but these are things you're typically learning from your experiences, from your on-campus job, from your job off-campus, from maybe projects within classrooms and your classes that you're taking. These are things that we call interpersonal skills or soft skills that most supervisors or can't necessarily provide training on. And especially when we think about that first role after graduation, these are things that employers are expecting you to have already. So really thinking about how are you building those already? All right, so what did we just do? We identified transferable skills. And we utilize keywords and action verbs to really drive home and write out our resume action statement. So this is what I want you all to do as a reflection from today is spend some time. Look at your job description if you're currently an on-campus student employee. Think about what you do. What transferable skills are you taking away from your role that you can use to develop in interviews, in your resumes for your overall career goals, all right? Again, there's skills that a person has developed which can be applied into different jobs or situations. All right, so last but not least is takeaway 3, right? I really want to drive this takeaway home because we're talking about showcasing your on-campus student employment experience or any experience, right? No matter where you're at in your career development, you could be in a club. It's talking about how to leverage LinkedIn and seek opportunities to maximize your involvement on campus. That could be either through a student job or through being involved in an organization or volunteer work. So let's take a look at what that looks like. All right, so this is a good example. This is actually one of our past student employees. She is great, Kelly. She really did a great job of kind of taking her time working at the Career Center and documenting, right? Really, documenting is the best word I could think of because she took pictures while she was here. She really reflected while she was in her on-campus job and said like, okay, I just led this project or I just led this presentation. Let me post about it on LinkedIn. You can kind of think of LinkedIn as almost like a way to keep memories, if you will, but also document things that you've done. And this gives employers or someone who is looking at your resume another picture of you. It tells them your story, while your resume tells me, again, just a summary, generally of who you are as a professional, listing out things. Your LinkedIn allows me to learn more about you and your story and who you are and what you're passionate about. And Kelly does a great job of doing that through LinkedIn. Again, from simple things like, her background that she has on there to her headline, I can clearly see what she's aspiring to pursue. And it tells me a story of what she wants to go into, right? That next section that kind of also allows you to reflect on who you are and what your accomplishments are is your about section of LinkedIn. So again, a little small step to go towards your career development or your professional development as a student employee on campus is to write out your about section. And what I often tell students with your about section, it's kind of like a cover letter, but it's more just telling your story, right? What have you done? Where do you want to go? What are your goals? And what are some of your skills that you want to showcase in your about section? I want to acknowledge it might seem like an intimidating task, especially seeing this about section, but it's really not. And you have support. You have peer educators and career counselors to kind of talk this through in terms of what could go in your about section. But the one thing I want to stress about LinkedIn and using it to showcase your student employee experience, don't just like regurgitate your resume on LinkedIn. Don't just put what you have on your resume on LinkedIn. Make sure that you're kind of adding a story to it. And we'll kind of see what it looks like when I'd want you to list your student employment experience on your LinkedIn in terms of what that looks like. Because LinkedIn allows you to have pictures, it allows you to put like media, like certain slides. Let's say you created a slide deck that you wanted to showcase. You can do that, right? So it has the power of these visuals that I'd want you to use to showcase your on-campus job. It's definitely something I wish I did more when I was a student employee on campus. I encourage you all to do it now. So here's a good example, right? I said, hopefully one of the kind of takeaway items I want you all to do after this training is if you don't have your current job as a student employee on your LinkedIn, go and add it now. This is the perfect time to do it. And it's kind of a gentle reminder to do that. So this is a good example of someone who is, this is Kelly's, I believe, was a lead student employment peer educator. She put her accomplishments. So notice how she didn't focus on just tasks. She put one of her strongest accomplishments on her experience description and she put certain skills, right? You can kind of see here some of the skills that she listed. And she has a lot of media and pictures that she's taken from her time and different events and presentations that she helped coordinate. So it's a great opportunity or way to showcase your work experience, especially now that you're a current student assistant. I encourage you all to do this. All right. Other ways to showcase your on-campus job. Posting on LinkedIn is another great way to do that, right? If some of us are not familiar with LinkedIn, it's kind of like, I used to say Facebook, but then students were like, I don't know what Facebook is. If you're still familiar with Facebook, it's like Facebook, but for your professional self. It's at the end of the day, it's a social media site, but it's a focus more on like who you are and what you're doing in the professional setting. So a couple ideas if you're like, what do I even post on LinkedIn? What does that look like if I was a student employee? Some couple posts that can look like reflect on what you've learned, right? It could be as simple as like, 3 skills. Maybe you've already been working at your current job for 1 semester and you're like, okay, maybe I want to post. Think about what are 3 skills you've gained from working at your current on-campus job after you completed 1 full semester, right? It could be a simple reflection post. You can highlight projects or contributions, maybe events, improvements of resources you help create. So thinking about like, okay, I just took on this larger project, or I just helped lead my first workshop ever, right? Or I helped, we were answering phone calls using this one way in terms of capturing student data, and I found a more simpler way to collect student data through another form, right? Simple things like that is an accomplishment. It's a task that you decided to take on. You can show skills in action. So showcasing maybe your problem solving, your communication, your teamwork. Let's say if you, work out of the USU, let's say just this Friday, we presented to the students who work out of the reservations department for the USU. So they help run all of the buildings and events that go on. So if they're like, let me showcase my skills in action, it could be as simple as like you taking a picture of helping set up an event for the day, or you going about like I see a lot of students do like a day in the life. I really enjoy those, like a day in the life as me, as someone who works as an event reservation specialist at the University Student Union. That in itself gives you exposure. It shows that you're communicating, that you're and you're documenting what you do in that role. You can share milestones or growth. Maybe it's your first job. My first ever official job, like by a check is what I always like to say, was an on-campus job. Maybe you got a promotion. Maybe you got like student employee of the month, or you went into a lead role. Maybe your contract on campus is coming to an end and you want to kind of showcase that. You can showcase that via LinkedIn as well. And last but not least, maybe connecting your job to your career goals, right? This is Kelly, the last student I showed, is a good example of that, because she kind of did not really know what she wanted to do coming into taking on her role. And kind of towards the end of her time here, she realized this role sparked my interest in this, right? She found she really enjoyed career counseling and working with students in a college setting. So she really kind of reflected her story of working on campus and being involved on campus to help her understand what her overall career goals are. This can be very simple as you reflect and think about what are some tasks that you do. Maybe you really enjoy, you're an administrative support student in a department, and you really enjoy the aspect of marketing or creating social media posts. That could be the one thing that sparks like, okay, maybe I want to look for work like this afterwards and connect it to my overall goals. So what makes a strong post? Be specific, avoid generic statements, really try to tell a story. Focus on growth. Where are you going? What skills have you built? Keep it short. I also don't want like 3 pages. So don't try to like overthink it. But again, tell a story, not just tasks, to showcase your accomplishments. So here's some good examples, right? Some of my students who presented at a conference, they showcased that. Took this one of our student employees who got student employee of the month, right? Or just posting of different events that you help coordinate, right? Simple things like that can help show that you're engaging and building your network. And when you post, it reaches more people, right? So that's another kind of benefit of that. Again, so how to maximize your experience. If you're currently a student employee, think about how to be proactive in your professional development. Maybe it's volunteer for projects or taking on special assignments to build skills. I think about the student employees out of our center, right? Some of our students were career peer educators that did one-on-one advising, but it was not their overall end goal, right? They got great skills that allowed them to think about communicating, customer service, critical thinking, but they wanted to go into marketing and graphic design. So the student took on like small special projects to help them build skills. This, of course, is a conversation with your supervisor. So this is where I also say bring your supervisor into the conversation. Let them know what your career goals are. Where do you want to go? Where do you see yourself going after your time here at CSUN? It could kind of help them think about ways to incorporate that or help you in your career development. Look for ways, again, to improve a process, bring up the idea to a supervisor. When given the option, step into those leadership roles. I know sometimes it could be intimidating to help with new projects, but this is being uncomfortable sometimes creates growth and allows you to open new opportunities. So I encourage you all to do that. Understand how your role as an on-campus student employee helps and supports your department. I think oftentimes students will like, well, I'm just, I'm just a front desk student, or I'm just a peer educator. Like, this is just my role. But know that you contribute greatly to your department and understand why and how you do that. So it'll help you understand how to communicate that in an interview. And then last but not least, reflect on your growth. If you're like, where do I begin from this reflection? Ask with your supervisor, ask for feedback. I think that's a great way to begin and kind of have the conversation. So I went through that really, really quick, and I want to leave time for questions. So I'm just going to breeze through this next part, which is just our resources. So I want to remind you all that we're here to help you no matter what you might be taking on. And we do that in a variety of ways. So we have drop-ins and career counseling appointments. So drop-ins are quick, no appointment needed. They're posted online. But if you wanted a more in-depth conversation, those are through a career counselor, which are about 30 to 45-minute long, depending on what your topic is. I suggest start off in drop-ins, and then we can decide, is career counseling something that you need? And they'll usually refer to you in that drop-in. So it's a little more accessible to do drop-ins, but if it doesn't work with your schedule, please still call us. We'd be more than happy to meet with you if drop-ins don't work with like your schedule. Handshake. Handshake, you all as on-campus student employees are probably very familiar with Handshake, as a lot of on-campus jobs are in there, but I do not want you all to forget that full-time jobs are in there, internships are in there, and it's a great place to begin exploring. So if you're like, where do I go next? Build your Handshake profile. Go in and build your Handshake profile. And if you're like, how do I do that? Come into drop-ins and one of our peer educators will help you. If you're like, how can I continue to build skills? What does this look like for me as a student employee? You can build skills and continue to gain real world experience on your own time through Parker Dewey, which is our micro internships platform. If you scan that QR code, it'll take you directly to our site for you to create an account. It's a great opportunity. It's like short-term projects. They're flexible, they're paid, and they're ways for you to add projects to your resume. And again, I start thinking about what are some specific skill sets I want to start building. Parker Dewey is a great option. We also have Forage. If you're in the process, which a lot of students might be, is exploring what jobs I want to pursue. I don't know what it looks like to be a marketing associate. I don't know what it looks like to work in human resources. Forage is a great opportunity. It is a job simulator, so it allows you to complete a task from beginning to end, like if you were a marketing associate for a specific company. And these are projects that you could also add to your resume, right? So these are small things that maybe in the summer break, if you're not taking classes or in times where it's a little more quiet, you can take on, but slowly build at your own time. So I really encourage you all to check this out. If you're like, I need professional attire, I'm interviewing for an internship, or I'm going to apply to this full-time role, my graduating seniors, take advantage of Maddie's Closet. We recently moved to a new location. So it is drop-ins only, no appointment needed. We're located out of the University Student Union in the Valera Nest. So I encourage you all to check us out. It's a great resource, and you get styled, so you get advice, and it feels just like you're shopping. So I really, really enjoy Maddie's Closet. Last but not least, we talked about LinkedIn and you're like, where do I begin with trying to update my LinkedIn? Start off with a headshot. So we have a brand new photo booth in the Career Center, no appointment needed. Just come in when we're open, Monday through Friday. Please come in from Monday through Thursday, we're 9 to 5, and then on Fridays we close at 4. So please come and take a photo. It's a great opportunity to update and just have that headshot ready or handy for LinkedIn for other things that might come up. And a majority, if not all of our resources that I referenced today are in CareerLink. So CareerLink is our online career exploration tool that has so many different resources, from learning more about yourself and understanding yourself to exploring graduate school and maybe even more resume samples. It's a great place to begin. If you're like, have a question, I often tell students, if you can't access us and you have a question at like midnight, which I apologize, but I will not be there to help you. CareerLink will be there to help you to kind of answer those questions. And last but not least, just kind of our takeaways today. Your resume format and structure matter. Identifying transferable skills from your on-campus job and tailor them to your resume. So transferable skills are very important. Leverage LinkedIn to showcase, your opportunities on campus and take advantage of your Career Center resources. We're here to help you, and we want to support you in your journey. And then last but not least, before I launch our last poll, and maybe you can launch the poll as well while I'm going over this last slide, is we have some events for this week. This is just the first of our events to kick off the rest of our events that we have going on this week. We have our Sweet Success event, which is tomorrow from 11 to 1. We really are just showcasing what our team has to offer. We're talking more about how to find an on-campus job, and we're saying thank you to student employees and supervisors, anyone who supports student employment on campus. We're going to be there on Baramian Lawn, which is just outside of the Career Center. So if you've ever seen kind of that fountain, I'm like, yeah, that's the only fountain on campus. There's that fountain outside of Baramian. If you don't know where Baramian Hall is, it's the building that has financial aid on the first floor and student services. We are going to be out there on Baramian Lawn. Come out and meet us. We're giving away desserts, pastries, fun stuff just to say thank you and celebrate on-campus student employment. And of course, any resources, answer any questions that you all might have. If this session just brought more questions for you, please come out and meet us. We'll all be there. And then on Thursday, we have an alumni panel it's Thursday, April 8th from 3 to 4. This one is also virtual, so you can learn from alumni, so actual student employees who already graduated, and they're going to talk about their experiences and how they've used their time as a student employee in their career. So I really encourage you all to come out to this panel. It's a great opportunity. And then Isabel just launched the poll. So if you all can take some time answering the poll, this again will help us tremendously as we're thinking about what programming is next and help us understand what you learned from today, and help us as we plan next events. So with that being said, in kind of our limited time, I want to take some time for questions. Were there any questions in the chat, Isabel, that you wanted to kind of share out loud while people are finishing up the poll?
Yeah, of course. So right now, there's no questions unanswered in the chat.
Nice.
But I encourage for the students that are in the room, both students and student assistants, to please write down any, final questions that came up for anybody during the first part of the presentation or the resources. We're more than happy to answer your questions. But generally, I think, let's see.
I see someone's raising their hand. Maybe we want to stop recording.
Yes,
And then
one moment.
we stop sharing for 1 second so I can see my host tools.
Let me go ahead and stop.
Okay, I changed the